turn your anxieties into prayers. If it seems like God isn't answering those prayers or isn't taking it away, is it possible that God is allowing you to experience the anxiety as a way of drawing you into a closer relationship with Him?
Dr. Grcevich, so excited to be with you. And we're going to be talking about a variety of topics, and we're going to start with mental health. This is a big one on parents' minds, especially after COVID and with the news popping everywhere.
Yep.
How does anxiety show up in a child? How do we know a child is maybe struggling with anxiety?
So if we start with, say, like a young child, preschool or a kindergartner, it may show up as selective mutism, being, very reluctant to talk, especially around unfamiliar people. As kids get older, that it may manifest itself as, kids having a hard time leaving the house to go to school, leaving mom and dad's bed to be able to sleep in their room on their own. When we get into school-age children, that they may have lots of vague physical complaints that don't have a specific medical cause. My head hurts, my stomach hurts. Kids who are in the nurse's office at school more often than one would expect.
Yeah, Dr. Grcevich, my daughter, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, you're talking about physical symptoms. She said, man, my stomach hurts. I haven't gone to the bathroom for days. And she all of a sudden was having this social anxiety that we didn't really know about, but she was complaining about her body. And so we went through all these tests to look at, ultrasounds, to look at things that may be happening inside. And the doctor said, hey, we can't see anything. And it was all physically presenting itself. Then we found out, there's this social anxiety that all of a sudden has come on, that tends to come on 2nd, 3rd grade for kids, because now they're learning that other kids can have thoughts about them, and they're going, oh no. And so she was having a hard time with that. We still go back to that moment in her development where once we learned there was some anxiety, and I was able to step in and encourage her to see things a different way. There's a big shift for her once she felt she understood what was happening inside of her. So love that you mentioned the physical complaints. So important for us to understand that.
Yeah, so one of the things that's important for kids to understand is that these pains are real.
Yeah.
They're not making it up. And the origin of this is that when kids are anxious, their brain starts releasing all sorts of stress hormones into their circulation. And so what happens is that your muscles start to contract. And as a result, the muscles in your scalp contract, you build up lactic acid and you get headaches. Or in response to these stress hormones, the cells that line your stomach start to produce too much stomach acid. And you end up complaining about having an upset stomach. Or your muscles ache, or you may feel dizzy or weak or lightheaded. But again, it's there for a reason, and it's because those are the physical manifestations of your body's response to your experience of being stressed.
And how do we know, what's the difference between anxiety and stress with a teenager, right? Because you start to see these things, and I mean, it's normal to have some stress and be a little stressed out as a teen.
And necessary to have stress, because you don't get stronger and you don't develop the coping tools to be able to manage.
You want to turn in your home
respond to challenges later in life. Yeah.
Yeah. So the anxiety, what's maybe one or two key things we need to look for in teens when we know, all right, we may need to get some help for our teen?
Well, if the anxiety is getting to the point that it's interfering with their ability to do the normal developmental day-to-day types of things that we would typically expect a teenager to be able to do. Does it get in the way of their ability to be able to make and keep friends? Is their anxiety at the point that they can't ask a question in class if they don't understand something, or they can't approach like a teacher for help with something? Then it's an issue. One of the manifestations that we're seeing more and more of anxiety in teenagers now, compared to say 10 or 20 years ago, is that there's a much smaller percentage of high school students with their driver's licenses.
That's true.
And so that one way it'll manifest itself is that kids are uncomfortable with the notion of getting behind the wheel of a car or embracing the independence that comes with having a driver's license.
That's a huge milestone too at that age.
Applying for a job somewhere. Even something like when we start looking at things that are, cues that it might be an issue. Can your teen, can they walk up to the counter at Chick-fil-A and order their lunch? Can they pick up the phone and call in and order a pizza and order a Chinese? Yeah. Like day-to-day little things.
So life skills.
Yeah, life skills.
Yeah. And something is behind that anxious behavior, what they see. And I love telling parents to slow down, stop with them, and ask them, I can tell you're anxious. What do you see? Help me see it from your perspective.
So one of the things that we know from various neuroimaging studies that have been done with kids and adults is that folks who have issues with anxiety disorders, essentially their brains are hardwired to overestimate the level of risk entering into a new or an unfamiliar situation. So that, for example, someone coming and visiting a church for the first time might assume that the people that they meet are making all kinds of judgments about them that they're not actually making. Right. That they may misinterpret, again, someone's body language or facial expressions. And again, that they'll get, what we would refer to as thinking errors, or they make false assumptions about what's going to happen into a given situation or how people are going to react to them that don't really have a whole lot to do with reality.
And I love that you mentioned thinking errors, because it's a thought error. It doesn't make the person bad.
That's right.
It just means you point that out and you go, wait a minute, there may be another way of looking at this. If there's an error, there may be another way to look at this. Let's become detectives and let's figure out if you're seeing things accurately, because if you're not, your emotions change, your behaviors change, you're experiencing the situation very differently than how you could be.
Yeah, that's the whole premise behind cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one evidence-based treatment that's shown to be helpful for kids and for adults who struggle with significant anxiety disorders.
No, that's great. And one of the things that I saw on your site was independence therapy. Talk a little bit about that. That's it's kind of intriguing around anxiety.
So one of the theories as to why rates of anxiety are so much higher now in kids and teens than say like 20 or 30 years ago is a preoccupation with safety. Think about just go and visit a park with your kid. That you don't see the 10 or 12 foot high sliding boards that you used to see. Or the monkey bars, or because everybody's always concerned that you're going to get hurt. Yeah. And so that what independence therapy involves is it's talking with kids and helping them to identify things that maybe they want to do but are a little uncomfortable with doing, and it's providing them with the encouragement and the support to take the initiative to do those things. It could be something like going to a movie by yourself. Being able to walk into a restaurant and order a meal. It could be something like going and getting your own library card. Being able to ride your bike to church. Or to ride up to the mall, to go visit a friend in another neighborhood, and parents. One of the things that's I think essential for people to understand is that kids learn how to deal with stressful situations by watching their parents deal with stressful situations, and in particular, this is one of the reasons why we saw such a spike in rates of anxiety during COVID. So that when a parent is, sending a message to their child that it's not okay to go play, in the park 4 houses down the street, and that's not safe, kids will internalize a sense that the world's unsafe, and they'll become more fearful of more fearful of doing the kinds of things that we would typically expect kids to do, as they grow more independent. And so that we're getting in the way of them doing things that they need to be able to do from a developmental standpoint.
Yeah, it's that safety side where we project our need for safety. We all have fears. Everyone carries them. And some people show them more than others or are controlled by more than others. And I really think that an important piece to this is that we're able to step towards the anxiety, as you were saying. Independence therapy is stepping towards it, the baby steps concept, right? That you're stepping towards it rather than avoiding or stepping away from and giving more power to the anxiety and pursuing comfort. You're creating a bit of discomfort in order to soften the control that anxiety has.
Think about it the way you would exercise. That, if you go to the gym and, if you're lifting weights or if you're running on the treadmill and you don't feel uncomfortable at some point, your body's not getting stronger.
Yeah, that's good. Now, the hard part, I can already hear the parents saying this and saying, well, when is it too much? Because you could push a child a little too much, just saying, hey, you got to do this, you got to do this. And they are at a place where they're truly not ready to do that one thing that they need to do in order to pursue what's making them anxious. When is it too much that we're pushing them too much towards their anxiety and maybe not validating enough initially? So what kind of context can we set up in order to do that well?
Kids will let you know sometimes when it's too much. And that something that's important for parents to understand is that sometimes anxiety ends up being manifest through anger, moodiness, irritability, aggression. And when parents are seeing kids struggling with stuff like that, one of the things that happens in a therapeutic environment, is that one of the things that helps kids with anxiety is graduated exposure. So that, you don't throw your kid in the pool and teach them to swim, but maybe the first day, you take them by the pool. Day 2, you let them dip their feet in the water.
That's good. Very practical.
Yeah.
Little steps towards that. And that's fantastic. Because I can already see some of the type A's, right? Oh, all right. I'm gonna make them do this, the full thing. And it's taken one step at a time with the goal of freedom in helping our child gain trust. That's the big one. Because with anxiety, there's a lack of trust that I'm not going to be safe, either with you or in the environment or wherever I'm at. There's this question of trust. And so as we develop trust with our kids as parents, that relational capital of us being their cheerleaders, being right there with them and celebrating at the end, we can set a context that is super positive as we're stepping towards anxiety together.
That's right. We have to model for our kids the behaviors that we want them to exhibit.
Yeah. Have fun celebrating that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, the conquering of anxiety. Yeah. Now, is it hard for some kids to pursue spiritual development when they're struggling with anxiety? Is that a hard thing for some?
It's a hard thing for kids. It's also a hard thing sometimes for adults too. And so some of the kinds of things that we'll see from a spiritual standpoint, there'll be an issue with kids, is that, in the same way that folks are prone to misinterpret what other people are thinking of them, they're oftentimes prone to misinterpret what God thinks of them, and to maybe view, God as less merciful than he really is, and more, more truth and judgmental, as opposed to, being a God of grace.
Of relationship.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
One of the common, struggles is that folks read these passages in scriptures. You think about, Philippians, like, be not anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition. And so that you'll see situations where folks, who have like an anxiety disorder, they pray about it, it doesn't go away, and they start to question their own faith. And that they believe that there's something, that there's something wrong with them. one of the most common struggles that would bring kids from Christian families into a practice like mine, is like the fear that that they've committed the unforgivable sin.
That's right. Yeah.
And I tell
this obsession with that. Right?
Yeah, I tell kids, if you're worried that you committed the unforgivable sin, you didn't commit it.
Right.
By
That's
definition,
exactly right.
that if you committed the unforgivable sin, you wouldn't be worried about that because your heart would be too hardened. And so that that a lot of times folks who wrestle with anxiety, that they may be prone to legalism. One of the issues is they like being in control. So that a challenge you might see is folks feeling as if they need to earn their salvation, as opposed to just freely accepting. It's all about control. And so that I'm going to do for God, and that I'm going to do everything possible to ensure that in fact I am saved, as opposed to simply accepting his free gift.
And that's fantastic, and we'll touch on a little bit more on that in a moment. What are some other ways anxiety shows up? Like there's obsessive compulsive. There are other types of anxieties that are up.
So, you think about, you mentioned earlier, like social anxiety. Like someone with generalized anxiety would oftentimes be worried or nervous about something most of the time, most every day. And that oftentimes is accompanied by some of the physical symptoms that we talked about before. People with, panic disorder, have these acute anxiety episodes where maybe for like minutes up to an hour, they feel like they can't breathe, their heart's pounding out of their chest. They'll get an overwhelming sense of dread. And so some people who would experience agoraphobia would find that in crowds or in situations where it's hard to get up and leave without drawing a lot of attention to yourself, that might be triggered, specifically in those situations. And you touched on as well, obsessive compulsive disorder, so that it isn't necessarily limited to the folks who, have these ritualized kinds of behaviors where they got to wash their hands 30 times a day. They're checking the stove and they're checking the water before they leave the house.
Driving and circling back.
That one of the things that we see a lot of kids, a lot of adults struggle with, is the obsessive thinking. The thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking about something that bothers you and not being able to get past it or being able to let it go. So that oftentimes, we talk about like autism occurring on a spectrum. Anxiety often occurs on a spectrum. And like, the child who, at age 6 or 7 is having a hard time sleeping in their own bed at night, when they're 10, that may be the kid who's in the nurse's office or missing 20 days of school every year.
It shows up differently.
And when they're 12 or 13, they're having a very hard time, interacting with or feeling comfortable talking with other kids. And at age 16 or 17, they don't want to get their driver's license and they're uncomfortable with the thought of going away to college and living in a dorm.
Yeah, and that takes a tremendous amount of patience from a parent as a child travels through that at those different stages that you were talking about. And so what does that look like for a parent what does it look like for a parent to step into this place of treatment and help for their child as they see it showing up either during the teen years or the preteen years or early on? Are there kind of first steps that parents need to consider? And is medication the answer? Is supplements? Is it therapy? I mean, this can be overwhelming to a parent when they see their child all of a sudden in this space of anxiety.
So one of the things that we know is that when we talk about these different anxiety disorders, medicine has been demonstrated to be very helpful. Cognitive behavioral therapy has been demonstrated to be helpful. But typically, when we're in a situation, unless it's severely impacting that child's ability to function, in the whole principle of do no harm, typically we would want to start with the least invasive treatment that we possibly could. And while there are some potential, that there are potential negative effects associated with having, your child involved in some sort of counseling or therapy, depending upon the person that happens to be working with them. Typically, we would prefer, when at all possible, to start with non-medical treatments first.
That's good. Love the answer. I mean, there can be exercise, there can be nutritional type of things that you can look at to just help the body overall as it's handling all the stress as well.
Yeah, there's more evidence looking at exercise specifically as a treatment for kids with depression, maybe than there is with anxiety. But again, I think that finding a counselor who's recommended by your pediatrician, by your children's pastor, the folks at your church, recommendations from like other parents that you trust, all of those, and if you're in a situation where you don't have those things available, I know that, here Focus on the Family has an excellent service available where folks can reach out to the ministry here and get the names specifically of Christian counselors.
And they can speak with a counselor for free?
Yeah.
They call the line at 1-800-A-FAMILY, and you speak with a counselor right there. This is fantastic.
And they have people, again, in local communities around the country who the ministry's vetted who are able to respond to some of those challenges. When, your pediatrician, your family doc, your pastor, your children's or student ministry leader, isn't in a situation where they have recommendations that they can give to you.
Yeah, that's great. One big thing is as we wrap up is just this idea of trust with around the topic of anxiety, right? And how do we establish that in our homes? How do we go into a place of trust? Now, I've seen, and while you think of that, the stats show that about 60% of young teenage women struggle with anxiety. In a recent survey, it was shown that way. And young men, it's 1 out of every 2. It's 48% struggle with high levels of anxious thoughts and feelings. And what was interesting is a separate survey showed that 37% of committed Christian teens actually pray. They actually pray. And you'd think 100% if you're a committed Christian that you go to prayer because there's this trust and you have this conversation with the Heavenly Father that's ongoing. You see in Isaiah 26 verses 3 and 4, where it says that he keeps him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on him because he trusts in him. It says the Lord God is an everlasting rock. I mean, our kids need to begin to understand that God is truly real and he's there with them. And that's an added piece that they can learn to trust along the way. When we're thinking about anxiety, the more we remove God, the more anxious we see our kids. It's very interesting to see that parallel. What are other ways that we can begin to build trust for our kids, especially our anxious kids, when they don't trust very much?
So again, I think that one of the things I have found myself recommending more and more over time, I haven't done this now for 38 years, it's sort of similar, to the situation when you're on a plane where they say if you have your kid with you, you put on your oxygen mask first, that parents have to be able to model how they use their faith to be able to cope with day-to-day stressors. And so that if a parent themselves is struggling with managing their own anxiety, I would suggest to them that maybe they consider getting some counseling or some help so that they can model the types of healthy approaches that they want their kids to engage in. But I also think it's important that, when we talk about this stuff with our kids, that, we help them to understand that, when I would look at those Bible verses, if I have a kid coming from a Christian family where they can relate to this context, I would tell them, turn your anxieties into prayers. And that if it seems like God isn't answering those prayers or isn't taking it away, is it possible that God is allowing you to experience the anxiety as a way of drawing you into a closer relationship with him? I mean, because after all, God sent his son, to die on the cross so that we might have the opportunity to have a relationship with him. And if God values relationship so highly, that relationship in the moment may be more important to him than our comfort in the moment.
That's big. That's a hard one, right? With our kids as they try to learn to trust in a Heavenly Father along the way. It's quite a journey. If you want more resources on age and stage specific, these are resources sent to you at the age of each of your children. Go to mykidsage.com. We also have weekly parenting tips there for you that you can sign up for. And we'd love to come alongside of you in that journey in the top areas of concern for you as parents. And that's everyday parenting, spiritual growth, sexuality, technology, entertainment, and a big one, mental health, that we just talked about today. And just know that we are here with you and for you. We want to cheer you on as you lean in to parenting. Thank you, Dr. Grcevich, for being with me today.
Thanks so much for having me.